Okay, so this is the first part of 3 parts looking into the character of Napoleon, because there's just so much for you to say about Napoleon if he comes up in a question. Remember, folks, if he does come up in an extract question, oh, sorry, made the colour do something. If he does come up in an extract question, 50% on the extract and then 50% from elsewhere. And also remember, if it's a show how far question, if it is, then you're going to need some counter argument, at least one paragraph of counter argument if it's a show how far. If it's a show that, then you don't need counter argument. Okay, so let's go and meet Napoleon. Right, first time that we meet Napoleon as a separate character is around about page 9, page 10. A couple of things, first of all, just to point out. Let's look at this little phrase here, fell naturally upon the pigs. Seems quite innocuous, it seems harmless. Again, that use of the word naturally, what's natural about it? It's all being arranged in this particular way. It's all a process of manipulation, and so there's a bit of irony there. But what we've got here is, from a very harmless start, we watch the tyranny grow. So I think it's important to remember that from the idea of the leadership as a natural thing for the pigs, from that idea we get to the unnatural tyranny of Napoleon. Right, Napoleon and the pigs, if you remember that each pig has a different source of power. There's physical power, intellectual power and rhetorical power. Now, you know the rhetorical power is going to be Squealer, the intellectual power is going to be Snowball, and the physical power is our friend Napoleon. And what it implies is this idea of physical aggression. But the great thing about Napoleon, if it is great, well, suppose if you're a crazy fascist, you probably think that it is, but the great thing about Napoleon is that he can combine these elements. He can combine his physical power with the rhetorical power of Squealer. He can pick and choose from the intellectual power of Snowball, and by doing that, by combining all 3 of these, by feeding off, almost parasitically, by feeding off the power that Snowball has to organise and to invent, and by feeding off the rhetorical persuasive powers of Squealer, then what he does is he consolidates his physical power. Now, Napoleon is introduced as having a reputation for getting his own way, and that is again an innocuous way to begin developing a dictatorship, because getting his own way is what this novella charts. It charts how he becomes the most important, the most omnipotent animal on Manor Farm. And getting his own way perhaps sounds harmless in one sense, but what it does suggest is that there's a ruthlessness about him. Ruthlessness. There's a ruthlessness about him, that there is an element of precise decision making that he is aware of, even if we, the reader, and especially the animals, are not aware of until perhaps it becomes too late. Remember, as a reader, we're always one step ahead of the animals. There's always that use of dramatic irony, so we can pick up on the steps to dictatorship that Napoleon makes in the way that the animals do not. Righty-ho. I just picked this quotation out because it's important. When we think about the 3 different types of power, we have to remember that at this stage in chapter 2, Napoleon and Snowball are working together to develop this complete system of thought. It's the pigs together, so it's Napoleon, it's Snowball, and it's Squealer. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to be tactical. They're making it harder for the animals to understand the nuances of what it was that Old Major was trying to communicate. And what they want to do is they're making themselves the leaders, as they're the only ones capable of understanding this complete system of thought. The other ones are just going to be, the other animals are going to be dumb followers. The irony lies in the fact that by complicating Old Major's dream of equality, they're creating a system of inequality based on those who can understand and those who don't. And that's something that Napoleon does hand in hand with Snowball. What's the result of this complete system of thought? Well, it is here implied that the other animals had great difficulty in thinking anything out for themselves, that they accepted the pigs as teachers, and that they absorbed everything they said. And that lack of discernment, that sponge-like level of understanding, really is what creates the inequality. The fact that the other animals cannot pick anything of value out of what the pigs say, they just absorb it all. And the key thing is there that Napoleon is with Snowball in that. It's not just Snowball doing all this, Napoleon's there too. And all the animals are doing is that they're swapping one level of control for another, and ultimately this level of control will be swapped for the tighter level, the more tenacious level of control that Napoleon's dictatorship demands. Okay, just when the rebellion happens in chapter 2, all of the animals with one accord. So chapter 2 is different from chapter 4, because in chapter 4, the Battle of the Cowshed, Napoleon's nowhere to be seen. However, Napoleon is involved, as are all the animals in the rebellion in chapter 2. So they all work with one accord. And remember that this is a little motif that is used throughout the novella, and what it does is it's repeated throughout the novella to chart significant moments in the development and the destruction of animalism. Here you have the idea of the power of the collective, and remember Napoleon is part of that collective in chapter 2. The euphoria of the animals when the rebellion takes place, it's here in the quotation, they gallop in a body right around the boundary. And again, it's that idea about in a body working together. Napoleon's there as well. So remember, when you're thinking about counter-argument and you have to think about positive things to say about Napoleon, Napoleon and Snowball and all of the animals work as a collective in chapter 2 to ensure the rebellion. It's only when danger threatens in chapter 4 that you see Napoleon slide off to the sidelines, and his absence is conspicuous. We note that he's not there. Right, now we talked about the different types of power earlier, and the different types of power then feed into this, which is the different types of leadership. So after the rebellion, what is the first thing that Snowball does? Well, the first thing that he does is that he threw on the fire the ribbons, Molly's ribbons, and says all animals should go naked. And remember the impact that has on Per Boxer when he gets rid of his sun hat. So what's the first thing that Snowball does? Well, he reinforces doctrine. He's focused on ideology, not individuals. He's out of touch with those people or animals that he leads. And that's an important thing, because that's a flaw in Snowball's leadership. But what is the first thing that Napoleon does? Well, the first thing that Napoleon does is he serves out double rations. His first act is to feed their stomachs, because he realizes the mentality of his followers, or the animals who will become his followers. They're not capable of understanding the ideology of Snowball. They're not capable of understanding the sophisticated semantics of Squealer. They're animals, and therefore they have an animal level of instinct. What do they want? They want food, and they want freedom to rest from work. Those are the basic things, a basic level of desire. And therefore Napoleon understands that. He's aware that the driving force of his followers is their stomachs, and what he does is he feeds their stomachs double rations. So when it comes to the styles of leadership, it's not that Napoleon is a better leader than Snowball. Snowball is ideologically gifted, but Napoleon understands leadership in a way that Snowball doesn't. Snowball's principled. Snowball has an ideology. Snowball's always thinking of the greater goal. Napoleon's thinking about, okay, what do I need to do to reinforce my position of leadership? I need to give the animals what they want. And therefore, when he gives them the double rations, is he being empathic? Is he showing, I understand what your needs are, I feel those needs too? Or is he ingratiating himself with the animals? Will it be that the animals remember Napoleon's action because it's what they wanted at that time? And I think it's the latter rather than the former. Okay, so just a couple of little things in relation to this. So foreshadowing is an important technique that's used by Orwell, and the fact that Napoleon feeds their stomach, that again will happen throughout the novella, to the point where he then begins to pretend that he's feeding them when he isn't. So it gives you this idea of a tactic that Napoleon is going to use. Remember that the pigs had taught themselves to read and write, and it foreshadows the pigs' cultivation of separation and difference. And that's something that Napoleon is going to... Now, by giving them a double rations, perhaps you could say, oh, but that's not cultivating separation and difference. That's him ingratiating himself. That's showing that he's on a level with them. But that's step one. That's step one, gain their trust. Step two, manipulate that trust. And one way that can be done is by reinforcing separation and difference, which is what he will do. Okay, so the commandments have been engineered by Snowball and Napoleon. It's Snowball who writes them up, but it's the pigs who've been working on this complete system of thought, remember. And what we see with the commandments, for Snowball, the commandments are a system of unalterable laws by which animalism will be governed. For Napoleon and for this novel, the commandments are stages which mark how far away from animalism Napoleon's dictatorship will go. So the framework that they provide here is that they will act as stepping stones towards Napoleon's complete domination. We can judge the pigs' actions and chart the farm's descent into tyranny, and that's Napoleon's tyranny, by watching those unalterable laws crumble. Right, end of chapter 2. So I think it's really important that we remember the euphoria of galloping around in a body, and that they believe that they've done this momentous thing in chapter 2, which of course they have. But at the end of chapter 2, and this is where structurally Orwell is showing us his skill, because despite the euphoria of that chapter, it ends in a way that makes the reader question the commitment of the pigs to animalism. So there's a bit of dramatic irony here. It's the disappearing milk, and what it does is it consolidates the unease that happened through the chapter. The animals have this legitimate concern, what's going to happen to the milk that the cows produce. It's dismissed by Napoleon, and again that foreshadows what he does. He dismisses their concerns. He doesn't care what they're thinking. He doesn't care if this is an important issue for them. This is his way of... He's gained their trust, he's given them the double rations, and now the manipulation begins. The reader can understand the metaphor when Napoleon places himself in front of the buckets, because this phrase metaphorically will show that he'll always place his needs above theirs. And what you have here is a nice little bit of juxtaposition, because in chapter 2, euphoria happens and the first sign of tyranny is there as well. Those two contrasting elements are within the one chapter. We know through dramatic irony that he's taken the milk, and the animals in their naivety believe that it has magically disappeared. Such simplicity of thought illustrates the level of faith and trust they have in their new leaders, and how easily they can be manipulated. And that's what Napoleon knows. That's what he's going to work with. Okay. Now, in chapter 3 then, the first time that we've got explicit conflict comes through with Snowball and Napoleon. They've shown that we know that they have different powers, physical and intellectual. We know that they have different styles of leadership, ideological, and a leadership that's based on giving the animals their basic need. And what we have here too is that it says explicitly that these two were never in agreement. And therefore we have the idea of conflict and a split or a schism happening. It's been foreshadowed here. The fact that they're never in agreement also can be seen as damning to both of them in terms of their leadership, that their particular stance on Animal Farm is something that they fight tooth and bone to communicate. They're not willing to compromise. They're not willing to see animalism as the greater good and therefore compromise a little on their own interpretations of it. Instead, they are never in agreement. They have this idea of polarity, that they're on different sides of the argument, and therefore animalism isn't their greater goal, but their particular interpretation of it is. And that's selfish, and that is flawed in terms of their leadership. Right, now again, something that Napoleon uses alongside Snowball, and then Napoleon starts to manipulate this, the idea of ritual and symbolic meaning. Again, he understands the basic level of commitment the animals have to animalism, and that commitment's based on their fear to have it questioned. It's also based on the idea of animalism providing for their most basic need. So what he does along with Snowball is he reinforces this ideology through more psychological means and emotional means, because ceremony and group ritual become increasingly important to control the animals. You've got the flag in the general assembly in the big barn. They've got dual significance. They allow the animals to feel this powerful sense of unity, that they're all in it together. Again, reaffirming the ideology of animalism. And if you just think about what we said there, the animals have this sense of unity. They have this, everything is to reinforce and reaffirm their commitment to animalism. And yet their leaders can't do that. Their leaders can't show the same sense of unity. They can't reaffirm and reinforce their commitment to animalism by compromising. They're constantly arguing with each other. You also have the idea that the flag is a potent symbol of who they now believe themselves to be. They believe themselves to be free. And again, the irony of that becomes more and more apparent when we see that freedom under Napoleon is no freedom at all. Okay, the pigs then choose their headquarters, and again you've got symbolic meaning here, the fact that they choose their headquarters to be the harness room. And again, that becomes more and more symbolic as we understand how tightly controlled Napoleon has the lives of all of these animals. The reader can pick up on that, can pick up on the more sinister connotations of the idea of the harness room as their headquarters, because psychologically these animals are going to be harnessed and trapped into one way of thinking. The harnesses represent control, and the pigs use their superiority to ensure that physical and mental control is always there over the vulnerable animals in a way that Jones never could, because remember, Jones's control was through fear and through physical means. He had his shotgun, he had his dogs, but he couldn't stop them thinking. He couldn't stop them believing in a better possibility. That's why old Major had the power and the privilege to gather everyone together there in the barn and talk about his philosophy and his dream. There was no psychological control there, and therefore when we think about Napoleon's control, it's always going to be worse than Mr. Jones, because it's complete. Now, Napoleon the strategist. Snowball's strategy is about the development of animalism as an ideology. Napoleon's strategy is about power. It's not about animalism, it's about power, his development of power. And it says Napoleon takes no interest in Snowball's committees. He has a completely different agenda. It's about stealth rather than argument. Snowball wants to win people, or I keep saying people, but sure, you know they're animals. But Snowball wants to win the animals round to his way of thinking, even though they're not capable of having that way of thinking. He wants the intellectual challenge of that. Napoleon doesn't want anything like that. What he wants is, he wants to get himself to a position where he can make his plan total. So everything is about stealth and manipulation. If you look at the verb choice here, because we're thinking about language elements, because that's our AO2, Napoleon took them away from their mothers, and that's the pup. And look at that verb choice, took, just the way they criticised Mr. Jones for taking away the young in chapter 1. Old Major, criticised, asked Clover where her foals were. Here you have this idea that what old Major criticised Mr. Jones for doing is exactly what Napoleon is doing too, but also the fact that he is he is working to a particular agenda. He takes the puppies because he knows it'll take a certain amount of time to develop them into the powerful bodyguards that he will need. It shows that he clearly believes he has the power to control the destiny of the farm's vulnerable ones. He does not for one moment doubt his power. What he's doing is that he is building it up. So he's building that power up, and he's doing it in a way that is secretly dangerous. So it is cunning. So that is insidiously. And all of that is made apparent through another choice of a vocabulary choice. And here you've got the noun seclusion, that they're taken away, the pups are forgotten about, and it shows a level of planning there. But Napoleon knows exactly what his long-term plan is, that he's always two steps ahead of Snowball. And that's why he is such an arch strategist. That's why he is clever. But that cleverness is a cunning, it's a manipulation, it's about him, his power, and nothing else. Right, okay, so the hypocrisy of leadership, and just as we alluded to in the previous slide there, that Napoleon's leadership is all about his own quest for personal power. So here we're talking about the windfall apples, and if you remember, it says in the novel that the animals had assumed as a matter of course that these would be shared out, because they believe in the basic concept of equality that they have been told about in relation to animalism and in relation to Old Major, in relation to the commandments. It's accepted and understood by the animals that they are equal, and therefore they expect, as a matter of course, for these animals to be shared. However, that equality is just a token gesture being used by the pigs in a way to reinforce and manipulate the others into believing in their supremacy, into believing in the quality and value of their leadership. Because Snowball and Napoleon, who are never in agreement, we know that this is the only time that they agree. And it says here that they have come to full agreement on the point of the windfall apples. So Snowball and Napoleon, who would never align themselves to the same thing in relation to animalism, here they come to a sense of full agreement. And therefore there's a real sense of disappointment, particularly from those readers who believe in Snowball's integrity and his commitment to his vision of animalism, because here he makes his hypocrisy apparent. We don't feel Napoleon being a hypocrite here. We understand his selfishness. We understand his manipulation. Even if it's only implied at this stage, we know that he has that latent capability. But for Snowball, perhaps we would have thought better. And the only thing that unites Snowball and Napoleon here are those elements of hypocrisy and those elements of self-interest. Okay, now what we have to think about here is the importance of chapter 4. So chapter 2, euphoria, your first indication that something might be wrong with the milk. Then you have chapter 3 that we've just had. We've got Napoleon being the strategist. We've got the conflict arising between Snowball and Napoleon. Then chapter 4, the battle of the cowshed, where we have that ability to understand how much commitment Snowball has to animalism, and that he's willing to sacrifice himself in battle. But the supreme thing is that in chapter 4, Napoleon and Squealer are both conspicuous by their absence. They're not there. Because when it comes to making sacrifices and when it comes to being brave to maintain animalism, these two are nowhere to be seen. Because the maintenance of animalism is not on their agenda. Animalism is just a tool to be used and to be warped and to be manipulated in order to reinforce and to assert the power of Napoleon. He doesn't care about animalism. Animalism is just a cloak that he wears, because underneath that, all he cares about is his personal control. The fact that they are omitted from chapter 4 is telling and purposeful, and it's important there that we do not see any level of commitment to animalism shown by Napoleon, because he is not committed to animalism. He's committed to his own agenda, which is about self-aggrandizement and which is about fascist dictatorship that he is going to assert here in Animal Farm. Right. Now, this is blank because I want us just to think here about structure for a minute. Now, in chapter 4 was all about the dedication of Snowball to his ideology, to the ideology of animalism. You know, he was wounded, he acted, he led, he controlled, all of those things that you can understand when you study Snowball and when you look at the Snowball video. But chapter 5 is all about Napoleon's commitment to his ideology. So what we have here is a nice little bit of juxtaposition. Ooh, I'm doing lots of swirls. That Orwell is juxtaposing the ideology of Snowball that's evinced in chapter 4 with the ideology of Napoleon that is made clear in chapter 5. And the two ideologies, despite the fact that they're wearing the same clothes, animalism, are completely and utterly different. Okay, so just as we had Snowball's commitment to animalism made apparent in chapter 4, now we have Napoleon's commitment to his own ideology, his own belief in his importance made apparent in chapter 5. So the first thing then, page 29, it says Napoleon was better at canvassing. And what we have is, again, that idea that Snowball is ideologically capable, but he is not. His intellectual abilities are about belief and ideology. He doesn't have an understanding of what are the basic needs of the animals in that farm. He doesn't grasp the need to appeal to the masses in the same way that Napoleon does. Because Napoleon, he had that appeal to the masses when he fed their stomachs in chapter 2. He understands their stupidity, he understands their instinctual need for food, and therefore what he does is he feeds the animals with what they need, rather than try to develop the animals' aspirations or hopes or mentalities. He just feeds the animals at the basic common denominator that they're at the moment. Also too, the idea that he uses blind faith in this warped version of animalism to drown out any opposition. He has the sheep bleeding there, 4 legs good, 2 legs bad, and therefore argument and logic, and those are the tools of Snowball, they're going to be drowned out by the ignorance of the louder voices who are supporting Napoleon. Again, when we talked about power, we talked about Napoleon, who had a reputation for getting his own way. His power is physical, not intellectual. And Napoleon produced no schemes of his own, but said quietly that snowballs would come to nothing. So again, that idea that he acts in a cowardly fashion here. He doesn't challenge Snowball's arguments head on, because he can't. And he operates again in this insidious, this secretly dangerous manner. He doesn't care whether he's acting morally or not. What he cares about is success, and therefore he realizes that by spreading doubt in the animal's mind and not replacing it with anything, that is enough for him to be successful. He doesn't want to feed the animal's minds. When you think about it, W.B. Yeats, one of our Irish poets, was, when he was talking about education, he thought that education wasn't about filling buckets but lighting fires. So it wasn't about just filling your head with information, but it was about inspiring thought and creativity. Now, for Snowball, really animalism is both. Well, animalism lights a fire for him, but what he wants to do is fill the buckets of the animals' minds with just lots of information. But what he fails to recognise is that the animals don't understand any of that information. He might be filling a bucket, but there are huge holes in the bottom of those buckets and the information is just falling out. It's going nowhere. However, Napoleon doesn't care about that. He doesn't care about their minds. What he understands is that they only operate on a very basic level. They operate on a physical and an emotional level. So he'll feed their stomachs and he'll feed their hearts with a sense of pride, even though what they have pride in is a dream. But he'll do that. He doesn't have to feed them intellectually, because what he's going to do is he's going to crush them intellectually. He's going to make them psychologically numb by fear. Therefore, he is going to be successful, because snowball strategies, as admirable as they may be, they're not being absorbed in the same way that he has absorbed them. Okay. Napoleon and his urinating over the plans. Remember, these are the plans for the windmill. And it's such a Napoleon-esque thing to do, isn't it? When you think about it, it's crass, it's brutish, but that's who he is. You know, he has a reputation for getting his own way. Whatever it is that will make him successful, that's what he will do. So there's dual meaning here, because it foreshadows how remorselessly he will deal with opposition. Here his opposition is Snowball, so what does he do? He pees over his plans. Now when opposition becomes perhaps more vocal, more capable of causing dissent, as you have with the hens, then he no longer pees over plans to show his disdain. He creates a pile of corpses. But what it also does is it reinforces that for Napoleon, physical acts will always take the place of reasoned argument. So, you know, rather than argue about the windmill plans, he just physically acts and shows his disdain. But secondly, the act itself is an animal's way of marking his territory. And remember, as soon as he gets Snowball out of the way in chapter 5, he takes Snowball's plans as his own. So perhaps this is an indication to the reader that we shouldn't be surprised when he claims the labours and talents of Snowball for his own. It's again a way of foreshadowing it. It shows the animalistic qualities of Napoleon that we never really see in Snowball. Snowball, in terms of anthropomorphism, Snowball appears more human. He's intellectual, he is ideological, not so Napoleon. Napoleon's always a pig. Okay, step 4 in this development of Napoleon. Vote for Napoleon in the full manger. Now, you've seen this before, because what did he do in chapter 2? He gave them a double ration. And again, what he's doing, he's reaffirming that he understands the masses in a way that Snowball doesn't. Napoleon appeals to the basic needs of the populace. He links his leadership with such fundamentals as the animals' need for food. And remember, the animals, in terms of their desires, it doesn't really get more important than the basic need for food. So when the animals are hungry, they immediately associate when the animals are hungry, they immediately associate Napoleon with solving that problem. And again, that shows Napoleon as a strategist. He understands his the populace that he's trying to appeal to. He gives them what they want. Okay, so then the move to scare Snowball from the farm. Napoleon uttered a high-pitched whimper of a kind that no one had ever heard him utter before. And again, this is so important because it shows how tactical Napoleon has been. Now, in the Battle of the Cowshed, we were aware of the tactics that Snowball had used, how he had used that idea of retreat to lure the humans into believing that they were winning, and then how that retreat was just a feign, that they had in fact planned it, and then once the humans believed that they were going to be victorious, the animals attacked again. And you know, we applauded his strategy here. But Napoleon's strategy is equally as clever, because what he's done is he has been secret. He's worked in that insidious manner. He has made his power clear to us now. Even though we were not 100% sure of what he was doing with the puppies before, now we can go, aha, clear planning made there by Napoleon. So the unquestioning obedience of the dogs who come to that high-pitched whimper, it emphasises how Napoleon is becoming to increasingly resemble man in his worst respects, because he now controls the other animals in the same way that Mr. Jones controlled his dogs, and the tails of the dogs wag in the same way that they did with Mr. Jones. But what we have here is just the cleverness of Napoleon. He had this worked out before, and that has to be one. You can say that's you know, his fault because he is working towards his own selfish agenda. But two, he's done this very cleverly, and it's successful. Chapter 6 then, the animals were too amazed and frightened to speak. They were silent and terrified, with Snowball screaming and running off the farm, being chased by the dogs. And it's quite clever here, the way that we have so very quickly a change in mood. We've had the euphoria, we've had the sense of the animals working towards what seemed like some sort of democratic election between Snowball and Napoleon, and now all of that has just been changed. The animals are shocked by the apparent spontaneous acts, and again, this is the word spontaneous is used ironically a few times in the novel, with the spontaneous celebrations and that spontaneous demonstrations that happen later on. But what you have here is that there's nothing spontaneous about it. The reader knows that it has taken months in the planning. You've got emotive diction here with silent and terrified, again bringing this idea of a new level of negativity in the animals' lives. Now, in chapter 1, when they went to the barn, when they were singing Beasts of England, the noise of it woke up Mr. Jones, and he came out with his gun and he shot his gun into the air, which caused the animals to fearfully retreat back to their homes, and then very quickly they fell asleep. But here, with this act, they are silent and terrified, which is not something that they ever were with Mr. Jones in chapter 1. That sort of emotive diction is not used because the animals go back to their homes and fall asleep very quickly. But here there is a sense of a different level of negativity. Their lack of comprehension of what has happened emphasises the distance between the ideals about what they believed in and what was really happening. So there is something new here. The diction is more emotive than had been used previously. They are amazed, too frightened to speak, which is not anything associated with their life with Mr. Jones, even though it's old Major talks about the, you know, how cruel and short their lives are under Mr. Jones. Even when he goes out and shoots with his gun, they're asleep in a moment. You know, that's the quotation from the end of chapter 1. But here they're not asleep in the moment. Here they're too amazed and frightened to speak. They're silent and terrified. Something new has happened. They're in a new level of terror, something that they've never experienced before. The dogs were fierce-looking wolves who wagged their tails to him in the same way that the other dogs had used to Mr. Jones. Again, this is important. It's not often in this particular novel, because Orwell has a very journalistic style, so it's not often in this particular novel that we get any figurative language, similes or metaphors. But here you've got one, this metaphorical reference to the dogs as fierce-looking wolves. And again, they've been nurtured that way by Napoleon. These are Bluebell and Pincher's pups, so there's no need to believe that they would ever be fierce or wolf-like, and yet this has been through the nurturing of Napoleon. Nurture. nurturing of Napoleon, that he's changed them into this. And again, it shows the level of manipulation that he has and the extents to which he's willing to go to change the nature of these dogs into something completely different to reinforce his power. Napoleon's mastery is confirmed here. Now, the dogs had always looked to Mr. Jones as their master, and now they wag their tails to him, Napoleon, in the same way. So the dogs are here as a wall of defence, and they're there as a potential threat to the other animals. The dogs are Napoleon's shield, and Squealer is his sword. And here, this takes us back to right where we started, the ability to take power, take different types of power and mix them together to consolidate power through mixing physical and psychological power. And that's what Napoleon does, and it makes him untouchable. He cannot be questioned. The farm is becoming this totalitarian state that he wanted, that he always wanted. He was just using the mask of animalism in order to get there. Now he's got there, and we have the understanding that physical and psychological power will rule. The animals are trapped. Okay. If you look to just at that combination of physical and psychological power, you've got that has been used and reinforced in the previous slide, but now Napoleon has created a combination of violence and ignorance to safeguard his power. You have the tremendous bleeding of the sheep with the 4 legs good, 2 legs bad, and what we have here is again foreshadowing how opposition voices will either be frightened into silence by the menacing growls of the dogs, or they'll be drowned out by the sheep. All opposition, as represented here by the 4 porkers, will be drowned out or will be frightened into silence. None of the animals is capable of challenging the decisions. They're passively accepting what happens. The animals have now become part of a system that will guide them and will make it easier for the pigs to manipulate them. Their ignorance and apathy, their unquestioned acceptance has created this dystopian, this twisted place. It's a hellish world, and they have collaborated in creating it. Unknowingly, they didn't realise that's what they were doing, but they have collaborated with Napoleon to create it. Because their lack of intelligence, their lack of questioning, the way that they absorbed the pigs, the way that they, without question, believed that power would fall naturally on the pigs, all of those things have worked together to get Napoleon to the position that he always wanted to be in. Okay, so Squealer then, remember that Squealer is the sword of Napoleon. He is the one who, through his sharp rhetorical powers, makes clear what Napoleon wants to happen on the farm. And here he lies in a very audacious and a very daring, risk-taking way. He lies to the audience to get them to accept a new version of history, to question what's fact, and to create his own warped version of the world. Remember that Squealer has been the one who can turn black into white, and that's what he does here, because he changes one realistic, factual way of seeing the world into something completely different. He asks them to appreciate the sacrifice that Comrade Napoleon has made. Comrade Napoleon has made no sacrifice whatsoever. What he has done is manipulate and sacrifice others, sacrifice the freedom of the pups, sacrifice the ideological developments that Snowball made, all of as to sacrifice the hopes and the dreams of the animals for equality. He has been the one who has manipulated the sacrifices of others. And the animals are not only victims of the pigs' manipulation, but they're victims of their own stupidity, because the more they believe that Napoleon is always right, like Boxer does with his little maxim, then the less likely they'll ever be to see the reality of the world that they're living in. Okay, and then finally at the end of chapter 5, then you have the last step in the dictatorship that Napoleon has brought about. The animals assembled in the big barn to receive their orders, and the windmill was in fact Napoleon's own creation. When we think about Napoleon as master, he has the dogs wagging their tails the way they did to Mr. Jones. And here you have the fact that the animals gather to receive their orders. His mastery is complete. He creates the orders, they then enact them. And the receiving of the orders, that verb choice there, makes the hierarchy of the farm apparent. The pigs will lead, the animals will follow, and that's the central tenet of animalism. But when we say animalism, we're no longer talking about the same animalism that old Major believed would come together in chapter 1, that Napoleon and Snowball worked together to create in a complete system of thought in chapter 2, that Snowball fought for in chapter 4. Animalism becomes different things as this novel continues. The word stays the same, but it doesn't mean the same thing. So just the way that Squealer uses words that have completely different meanings, here we've got this use of animalism when it doesn't mean animalism. It means dictatorship. In a similar way to how Napoleon overthrew the fundamentals of old Major's ideas, now he obliterates the central concepts that the animals perhaps have associated with animalism. He can warp facts, he can warp the truth, he can warp the past. And he changes the animal's view of the past. He can play with the animal's understanding, he can change their memories. That takes his power to a level never before seen in Animal Farm. He is omnipotent. He has a power that Mr. Jones could never have had, because psychologically Mr. Jones did not control his animals. He used whips and guns, and he used dogs to physically weaken his animals, but mentally he never weakened them. They still believed, they still had hope, and that was made apparent in how willingly they believed in the principles that old Major set out in chapter 1. But the weakened psychological state of the animals is something that Napoleon alone has created, and through that creation he can do whatever he wants.